The moment I read the text message from my mother, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a familiar numbness. 8 simple words on the screen. This year, just Victoria's family, keeping it small. I stared at those words sitting alone in my Denver apartment as snow fell in thick flakes outside my window, painting the city white. 8 words that confirmed what I'd known my entire life. I was the extra, the afterthought, the one who could be erased without consequence. My name is Morgan Reynolds. I am 30 years old, and this Christmas I expected things to be like every other year. The family gathered around the dinner table, laughter echoing the Christmas tree glowing with lights. Instead, what I received was just that short message from my mother. I should have been hurt. I should have called immediately, asked why, or perhaps even begged to be included. But 30 years of being the invisible daughter builds a callus over your heart. So instead, I simply replied, enjoy. That's when something shifted inside me. One word sent, and with it a decision made. I looked around my modest apartment, functional but sparse. Nothing like the warm, cluttered family home I grew up in. The home where Victoria's achievements lined the walls, while mine collected dust in drawers. The apartment felt suddenly cold, but not as cold as the realization that had settled in my chest years ago. I would never be enough for them. But in that very moment, another thought ignited within me. I would not sit alone in this cold apartment anymore. I had a special place my family knew nothing about, a mountain ranch worth $5 million in Aspen, a place I had quietly built as proof that I was strong enough to create my own table. And this year, I would open its doors and invite everyone who had ever been cast aside like me. I remember clearly how even from when I was young, my life always seemed to be measured against the shining shadow of my sister Victoria. In my parents' eyes, Sarah and Michael Reynolds' Victoria was the flawless golden child. She was beautiful, graceful, outgoing, the endless source of pride they paraded in front of neighbors and relatives. I, on the other hand, was often introduced with nothing more than a dismissive line, "This is Morgan Victoria's sister." That sentence was repeated so many times, it became my entire identity in the eyes of others, and even in my own parents' eyes. The family dinner table was the stage where this drama played out most painfully. From my earliest memories, that table represented a kingdom where Victoria reigned as queen, and I served merely as an attendant. I was 8 years old when I first understood what it meant to be positioned at that table. It was Thanksgiving, and the entire extended family had gathered at our suburban Indiana home. The adults' table gleamed with my mother's best china crystal glasses catching light from the chandelier. Then there was the kids' table, a folding card table covered with a paper tablecloth set with plastic plates. Despite being older than all my cousins, I was directed to the kids' table. "Morgan, you sit there and watch the little ones." My mother set her hand firmly on my shoulder, steering me away from the main table where Victoria, only 2 years older than me, sat proudly between our parents. Throughout dinner, I had to stretch to reach the serving dishes placed at the far end of the card table. No one noticed when I spoke. No one passed me the mashed potatoes until I asked 3 times. From my seat, I could see Victoria holding court at the main table, my parents beaming, as relatives hung on her every word about her recent dance recital. I remember thinking tables have power. Where you sit defines who you are. The holidays were supposed to be a time for families to come together, for children to wait eagerly for gifts, for laughter to fill every corner of the house. But for me, those days always made my heart tighten more than any other time of year. I still remember one Christmas when I was 14. The tree was decorated beautifully, lights blinking across the living room, and stacks of gifts were piled high beneath its branches. As everyone opened their presents one by one, I sat there waiting. Victoria received a delicate gold bracelet, and my mother kissed her cheek and said, "You deserve this because you've made us proud." I forced a smile, my eyes fixed on the tree, hoping to spot a small box with my name on it. But when the last bit of wrapping paper was torn away, I realized there was nothing for me. My mother looked uneasy and said, "You're older now, you probably don't need toys anymore." I nodded as if it didn't matter, but inside, something cracked. That night, alone in my bedroom, surrounded by the muffled sounds of Victoria showing off her new bracelet to our visiting grandparents, I made a silent promise to myself. Someday I would create a Christmas that was entirely mine, a celebration where no one would be forgotten. The favoritism wasn't just in the gifts, it seeped into every word, every glance. When Victoria was chosen as captain of the cheerleading team, the whole family threw a party to celebrate. When I won first place at the school science fair, my mother only said softly, "That's nice, but don't stay up too late anymore working on those projects." My father hardly bothered to glance at the small trophy I brought home, too busy bragging to the neighbors about Victoria. There were times when I tried to join the family conversation, eager to share that I had successfully rebuilt an old computer from scrap parts in the garage. But just seconds later, my mother shifted the topic to how Victoria was about to join the debate team. Every word I said seemed to hang in the air, abandoned with no one willing to catch it. Years later, I would learn the reason behind my parents' behavior, though understanding never fully healed the wound. My mother, Sarah, saw too much of my father in me. His technical mind, his introversion, his focus on things rather than people. She didn't know how to connect with those traits in him, and she certainly didn't know how to connect with them in me. My father, meanwhile, worried about my stubborn independence, my refusal to perform the social niceties that came so naturally to Victoria. They loved what they understood, and they understood Victoria. Through all those years, I slowly learned how to shrink myself. Instead of fighting for attention, I retreated into my own world in the garage where the smell of grease, the sight of scorched circuit boards, and the crackling sound of the soldering iron became my companions. I buried myself in chips and wires, patiently soldering one connection after another. I remember once spending an entire week repairing an old radio a neighbor had thrown away. When it finally played its first song, I was so overjoyed that I ran upstairs to show my mother. She only gave a faint smile and said, "That's impressive, but don't forget to help your sister get ready for tonight's party." Victoria never had to try to be loved, for her attention and recognition from our parents were as natural as breathing. For me, I had to do everything I could to prove I was worthy of notice, only to be met with the occasional indifferent nod. Many nights I lay in bed listening to the sound of laughter drifting from the living room, and I asked myself, am I really just the unnecessary child? That question carved itself deep into my mind, following me well into adulthood. I learned to exist in invisibility and find value in places no one else looked. Where others saw junk in the garage, I saw potential. Where others saw obsolete technology, I saw systems that could be reimagined. This skill finding value in the overlooked would later become my greatest asset, though I couldn't have known it then. One of the most pivotal moments happened when I was 17 and received a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious universities in the country. I ran into the living room trembling with joy, the acceptance letter still shaking in my hands. My father glanced at it and said, "Stanford. That's so far away. Are you sure Victoria will still be close to home, much more convenient?" I froze in place. Even as I stood on the threshold of a future, most people could only dream of all they could think about was whether I would be convenient for the family. In that moment, I understood that their love came with conditions. I was only valuable if I fit neatly into their vision of family, a vision that always centered around Victoria. Those wounds never healed. They built up inside me, forming a heavy weight I carried everywhere. They made me feel I always had to do more, achieve more work twice as hard just to be recognized half as much as Victoria. And in the end, I came to a bitter realization: my parents' recognition would never come. I could save the world, and in their eyes, I would still only ever be Morgan Victoria's sister. That was the first time I chose myself, but it wouldn't be the last. Leaving that small town in Indiana for California was a turning point I'll never forget. On my first day stepping onto the campus at Stanford's suitcase, heavy in my hands, I felt both nervous and excited. With a full scholarship, I knew I had finally proven my worth at least to the world outside. But even then, my parents still didn't see it as an achievement worth celebrating. On the evening they sent me off, my father only said, "That's so far away. "Will you really be okay? If only you had chosen a school closer to home like Victoria, we would feel so much better." Those words etched themselves into my memory, a constant reminder that no matter how far I reached in their eyes, I would always be the one who went against the family's wishes. What they didn't know, what Victoria didn't know either, was that while she was trapped in golden handcuffs bound by their expectations and approval, my banishment had given me freedom. Every time they pushed me away, they inadvertently pushed me toward independence. My years at Stanford were a constant struggle of studying, working, and simply trying to survive. I had no support from my parents. Every expense beyond the scholarship books, food, housing I had to cover on my own. There were nights I slept on a sofa in a cramped rented room, my backpack as a pillow, waking up in the morning to head straight to class and then to work. My meals were often instant noodles, sometimes cheap leftover pizza from a restaurant where I worked evenings. There were nights I choked while eating dry ramen straight from the packet, tears falling more from stress than from the salty taste. Meanwhile, Victoria attended a state university just an hour from home. My parents covered her apartment, her car, her meal plan. She came home every other weekend for home-cooked meals and laundry service. During holiday breaks, when I couldn't afford the flight home, I would see their social media posts, family dinners, shopping trips, Victoria in the center of every photo. Yet in those lean years, I learned resilience and discovered my path: technology and logistics. While Victoria studied communications, aiming for a career that would keep her visible and admired, I dove deeper into systems that most people never see, but that make the world function. I found beauty and efficiency in solving problems that existed in the background. It was those difficult nights that forged me into steel while Victoria remained cushioned in cotton. Every hardship taught me to stand on my own, to find solutions where others saw only obstacles. This resilience would become my foundation. Not the family name, not parental connections, but my own capacity to endure and adapt. I started my first company at 23. It was a small startup building a platform to optimize freight transportation, finding the most efficient routes for goods to travel from warehouses to destinations. At the time, no one believed in a young woman fresh out of school without family connections or backing. The early days were brutal. I scrambled to find every dollar to pay employees, coming close to bankruptcy more than once. I remember when the company account had only a few $100s left while payroll was due. I stayed up 3 nights in a row negotiating with a small hospital, desperately trying to convince them to sign a trial contract. If they had said no, the company would have collapsed. I sold my favorite laptop, the one tool that had been with me since Stanford, just to make sure my 2 employees got paid that month. I lived on vending machine snacks and worked until my eyes burned. The desperation of those days still lives in my body, a phantom pain that reminds me how close I came to failing. Thankfully, the hospital agreed to the contract. It was just a small breakthrough, but it was enough to keep us alive. That night, I walked back to my studio apartment in the rain, soaked and exhausted, but feeling something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not the kind that needs witnesses or validation, but a quiet certainty that I had done something remarkable through sheer force of will. I called my parents that weekend to share the news. My father answered distracted, the television blaring in the background. "That's nice, sweetie. Did you hear Victoria just got promoted, only 6 months at the marketing firm and already moving up? We're taking her out to celebrate tonight." I hung up and stared at my phone for a long time. That was the first moment I truly understood that my career would never be about them. It would be about me, about proving to myself what I could build with my own 2 hands. It was the moment I realized that seeking their approval had become a habit I needed to break. Then the pandemic hit. The world was thrown into chaos. Hospitals running short on medical supplies, medicine, and equipment. Supply chains across the globe fractured under the strain. That was when our platform became invaluable. We built a routing system that could track supply and demand in real time, ensuring hospitals were never left without what they needed. A shipment of masks in Texas could be redirected instantly to New York, where doctors were desperate. A truck carrying ventilators stuck in Kansas could be rerouted with just a few clicks. My team and I worked 16-hour days, exhausted, but driven by a purpose greater than ourselves. I ate meals at my desk, slept on the office couch, sometimes going days without seeing the sun. But every time our system successfully diverted critical supplies to a hospital in need, I felt that same quiet pride grow stronger. In just 1 year, my company had expanded to serve more than 50 healthcare systems across the United States. The press began calling us the nervous system of the medical supply chain. We were featured in tech magazines, business journals, and even on national news. I stood on the Forbes 30 Under 30 stage, my hands trembling as I held the name plaque. The audience applauded. Industry leaders approached me afterward with business cards and investment offers. And all I could think with a bitter ache was whether my parents would even bother to read the article. I checked my phone that night in the hotel room, wondering if they'd seen the news, if perhaps this achievement was finally enough to make them proud. The screen showed no missed calls, no messages of congratulation. Just a family group chat where they discussed Victoria's new house purchase, made possible by my father's generous down payment gift. That night, I realized that even if I saved lives, revolutionized industries, or changed the world in their eyes, I would remain secondary. No achievement would ever be enough because the problem had never been about my success. It was about their inability to see me at all. When a Fortune 500 corporation offered to acquire the company for $120 million, it took me a full week to believe the number was real. On the day the deal closed, I walked out of the office, watching the late afternoon sunlight cut through the skyscrapers, and realized I had just closed the chapter on years of hunger and struggle. I no longer had to worry about what dinner would be tomorrow, or how I would pay rent. I finally had freedom in my hands, not just financial freedom, but the freedom to build whatever life I wanted. And yet the most painful part was that my parents' view of me never changed. A few months later, during a family gathering, I reluctantly attended. I came home carrying an elegant gift I had bought in New York. Everyone was buzzing with excitement about Victoria, who had just been hired as a marketing director at a prestigious firm in Boston. My mother couldn't stop bragging, "Victoria is so talented. Her boss really trusts her." I sat there in silence, no one asking what I was doing. When I finally tried to mention, "I just signed a major deal," my father gave a faint laugh and said, "Well, that's technology hard to understand. Let's go back to talking about Victoria." In that moment, I felt myself slip right back into the place I had always been. The girl sitting at the edge of the table holding a small gift, quietly staring at the glow of Christmas lights, while no one really saw me. I had come so far, survived nights of eating instant noodles, days of sleeping on a sofa, and built a company worth hundreds of millions. But inside that house, none of it mattered. To them, only Victoria was worthy of pride. Only Victoria was worthy of love. After the sale of my company closed, I didn't dive into lavish shopping sprees the way people might expect. I didn't buy a sports car, I didn't throw parties in Miami, and I didn't travel the world in luxury. Instead, I chose something I had never truly had in my entire life, a home that belonged entirely to me, a place where no one could shut me out, no one could reduce me to a shadow. And so, I found myself in Aspen, Colorado. The moment I stepped into that snow-covered valley with the Rocky Mountains towering around me, I knew this was where I would build a place of my own. Something about the vastness of the mountains made me feel small, in a way that was comforting rather than diminishing. Here, everyone was small against the backdrop of nature's grandeur. Here, I could finally breathe. I purchased a 42-acre property quietly listed by a wealthy family relocating to Europe. The contract was valued at $5 million, but to me, it was more than just a number. It was a declaration. From the moment I signed the papers, I felt lighter, as if I had finally shaken off the invisible chains that had bound me in my parents' indifferent gaze. I hired a team of local architects and builders, but I was involved in every detail from the very first sketch to the final finish. This wasn't a project to flaunt wealth. It was my creation, my offering to the little Morgan who had once been forgotten beneath the Christmas tree. The lodge rose from the ground in cedar wood, its red timber carrying a soft fragrance whenever the sunlight touched it. The front doors opened into a grand hall with soaring ceilings, a granite fireplace big enough for a person to step inside, and a chandelier crafted from rough-hewn pine. The main living room was walled entirely with glass stretching from floor to ceiling, framing an unbroken view of the snow-capped mountains. Each morning when the sun rose, the light spilled in, scattering across the frozen landscape, like thousands of diamonds falling from the sky. Behind the lodge, I had a private lake dug and stocked with salmon and sturgeon, so in the summer I could fish beneath the warm sun, and in the winter it would freeze into a perfect mirror reflecting the violet sky. Inside, I designed 10 bedrooms each with its own balcony and private fireplace. The kitchen was lined with black granite, the island carved from a single slab of walnut, and along the wall hung a row of cast iron pans, gifted by a local chef I had hired as a consultant. I chose every piece of furniture myself: brown leather sofas, heavy oak tables, hand-woven wool rugs from the Navajo Valley. Every detail breathed warmth and durability, not the flashy opulence my parents once worshipped. This was a place where I wanted anyone who stepped inside to feel immediately: here, there is sincerity. Here, every breath of life is cherished. I kept the entire project a secret. Not a word to my family. Not a single photo on social media. When close friends asked, I only smiled and said, "I'm busy with a personal project." Because I knew if my parents or Victoria found out, they would twist it into another story. She just got lucky. She must have had help. Or worse, they would drape the credit over Victoria as they had so many times before. I didn't want this taken from me. I wanted it to be mine completely, so that when the time came, I could place it on the table like a trump card that flipped the entire game. Whenever I returned to Aspen to check on the progress, I often stayed for several days, sleeping on a makeshift pine bed in a house still smelling of paint and sawdust. At night, I would step out onto the balcony, wrap a thick blanket around my shoulders, and gaze at the mountains washed in silver moonlight, listening to the wind howl down the slopes. That feeling brought back memories of childhood nights when I stood outside the old porch looking in at the family gathered together without me. But now it was different. I was no longer the outsider. I was building a home of my own, a world where I chose who was worthy to sit by the fire and who would remain forever outside the door. When the construction was finally complete, I walked slowly through the house, running my hand across every tabletop, every door frame. In my mind, one thought echoed over and over: this is my home, not the home of the younger daughter of the Reynolds family, not a place where Victoria was always the standard by which I was measured. This was my domain, and no one could deny it. I knew that one day I would have to bring it into the light, and when that day came, it would be my answer. No shouting, no arguments, just a silent, undeniable truth. Morgan was no longer a shadow. I still remember that evening vividly, when the light from my apartment cast its soft golden glow, yet offered me no warmth at all. I held my phone in my hand, my fingers trembling slightly from the sting of the message I had received earlier. A thought flickered. Was it only me who had been excluded, or had my parents truly wanted a small Christmas, trimming the guest list down for intimacy's sake? I wasn't sure, but I needed to know the truth. I scrolled through my contacts until I stopped at Sophia, my cousin Aunt Patricia's daughter. I didn't see Sophia often, but every time we talked, it felt genuine. She wasn't fake. She wasn't biased. She was simply honest sometimes. So honest, it surprised people. I pressed call, held the phone to my ear, my heart racing like I was waiting for a verdict. "Morgan," Sophia answered after 2 rings, her voice carrying a note of surprise. "You're calling this late. Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath and asked bluntly, "Sophia, did you get a Christmas invitation from my parents?" There was a pause on the other end, a few seconds of silence, and then Sophia let out a dry laugh, a laugh without any joy. Sarah messaged my mom saying, "This year it's immediate family only," meaning just Victoria and her family. My chest tightened. I pressed further, needing the confirmation. "So you and Aunt Patricia weren't invited either," Sophia responded quickly. "No one was, not even Grandma Eleanor. She called me today furious. She said this hasn't happened in 30 years. I sank into the chair, my hand gripping the phone tightly. So it wasn't just me. They had cut everyone out, all so the evening could revolve entirely around Victoria. Memories rushed back last year, when Victoria had her first child. Christmas became a celebration of her little angel. and the rest of us, myself included, were nothing more than background extras. The year before that, when Victoria landed her job as a marketing director, my parents turned the family gathering into a showcase of her career. And now it was clearer than ever. They no longer needed anyone except Victoria and the glow of her halo. When the call ended, I sat alone in the darkened room, snow falling thick outside the window. Inside me, a strange current ran through every vein. I saw it more clearly than ever. This was no longer just about me. This was the truth about how my parents had chosen to live, revolving around one perfect child, willing to cast everyone else aside. But I no longer wanted to sit in silence and endure it. I had a place, a mountain home vast and warm, ready to open its doors. I could create a different Christmas, a new table where everyone had a seat, where no one would be abandoned the way I had been. I pulled out my phone and texted Sophia. "If you and your family want, come to my ranch in Aspen. I'll take care of everything." She replied almost instantly with a mix of surprise and delight. "You have a ranch? Let me tell Mom, but if you're serious, we'll come." 20 minutes later, Sophia called back, her voice bubbling with excitement. "We're in! And I think some of the other cousins will want to come too." I began making more calls one by one, reaching out to the rest of the family. My cousin Nathan in Chicago, who had stopped coming to Christmas years ago out of exhaustion, with the favoritism, burst out laughing the moment I explained, "A Christmas that doesn't revolve around Victoria and your parents, count me in." Aunt Patricia grew so emotional she could barely speak. "Morgan, do you know how long it's been since someone actually took the initiative to gather the family? Thank you." And then the final call with Grandma Eleanor left me choked up. She didn't say much, only one simple line: "Just tell me when to pack." My phone lit up constantly with messages of confirmation. What had started as a fleeting thought had now turned into reality. In less than a day, I had a list of over 15 people who agreed to come to the ranch in Aspen. Each new message felt like another brick laid into the foundation of a new kind of Christmas. I was no longer alone. No longer the one left standing outside, peering through the window at a glowing room I was excluded from. This time I was the one opening the door, inviting them in, giving them a seat at the long dining table, and together we would light up a holiday that finally felt true. Sitting quietly in my chair, I pictured it all. Strings of lights twinkling around the towering Christmas tree, laughter echoing through the cedar lodge, the fireplace crackling warmly against the snowy night. And I saw myself standing at the head of the table, not as an outsider, but as the host. For the first time in my life, I wouldn't be waiting for someone to offer me a seat. I would build the entire table myself, and only those truly worthy would have a place at it. As the pandemic swept across the nation, everything changed. Hospitals filled beyond capacity, essential workers risked their lives daily, and supply chains fractured under unprecedented pressure. While many businesses collapsed, mine became indispensable. The routing system we had built, originally designed to optimize freight transportation, suddenly became the lifeline connecting desperate hospitals with critical supplies. I remember the exact moment when I realized how vital our platform had become. It was 3 a.m., and I had been working for 20 hours straight. The office was empty, except for me, illuminated only by the blue glow of my computer screen. An emergency call came in from a hospital administrator in Queens. Their ventilator supply had dropped to dangerous levels, and patients were dying. Meanwhile, a shipment meant for them had been redirected to another facility due to miscommunication. With trembling fingers fueled by too much coffee and too little sleep, I tracked the shipment, found it still en route, and rerouted it back to Queens. The administrator called me back 4 hours later, his voice breaking as he told me they had received the ventilators just in time. 3 patients who would have died were now stabilized. I sat alone in my office as the sun rose over San Francisco, casting long shadows across my desk. For the first time in my life, I had tangible proof that my work, the work no one in my family understood, had saved actual lives. Not theoretical efficiencies or cost savings, but human beings with families who would see another day because of what I had built. The pandemic transformed what had been a promising startup into an essential service. Hospitals across the country began calling us desperate for help managing their supply chains. My team expanded from 5 people to 50 within months. We worked around the clock, often sleeping in the office, forgetting to eat, driven by the knowledge that each optimization we created translated directly to lives saved. Our system evolved rapidly. We added real-time tracking predictive algorithms that could anticipate shortages before they happened, and direct integration with manufacturing facilities. A shipment of masks in Texas could be redirected instantly to New York, where doctors were desperate. A truck carrying ventilators stuck in Kansas could be rerouted with just a few clicks. My team and I worked 16-hour days exhausted, but driven by a purpose greater than ourselves. I ate meals at my desk, slept on the office couch, sometimes going days without seeing the sun. But every time our system successfully diverted critical supplies to a hospital in need, I felt that same quiet pride grow stronger. In just 1 year, my company had expanded to serve more than 50 healthcare systems across the United States. The press began calling us the nervous system of the medical supply chain. We were featured in tech magazines, business journals, and even on national news. A journalist from the Wall Street Journal shadowed me for a day, amazed at how a 30-year-old woman had built something so essential during a global crisis. "How does it feel?" she asked me over coffee after watching me work for 12 hours straight, "to know your platform is saving lives every day?" I paused, searching for the right words. "It feels like finding purpose in being overlooked," I finally said. All those years of working with systems no one sees, they prepared me for this moment when invisible infrastructure became the most important thing in the world. The article that followed called me the invisible architect of pandemic response. It was published on a Sunday. Monday morning, my phone rang, an unexpected call from my father. "Morgan," he said, his voice strangely formal, "your mother and I saw the article." I waited for more, holding my breath, wondering if finally they would acknowledge what I had built. "It's impressive technology," he continued, "though I'm not sure I understand exactly what your company does. But listen, the real reason I'm calling Victoria just got promoted to senior marketing director. We're having a small dinner on Saturday to celebrate. Can you send something? She's been working so hard." The familiar pain returned sharper now, because for a brief moment, I had allowed myself to hope. I sent an expensive champagne basket to Victoria's promotion dinner and declined the invitation to join by video call, citing emergency work demands. That night, I stayed late at the office, recalibrating our algorithms to better predict supply shortages. I saved more lives while my family toasted Victoria's new title over dessert, not once mentioning my absence. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had built a system that could track and route the most essential supplies across an entire nation, yet I couldn't route my parents' attention in my direction for even a moment. Their love, like my hospital supplies, had a fixed destination, and it wasn't me. When I stood on the Forbes 30 Under 30 stage 2 months later, my hands trembled as I held the name plaque. The audience applauded, industry leaders approached me afterward with business cards and investment offers. I smiled and networked, but inside I felt hollow. All I could think with a bitter ache was whether my parents would even bother to read the article. I checked my phone that night in the hotel room, wondering if they'd seen the news, if perhaps this achievement was finally enough to make them proud. The screen showed no missed calls, no messages of congratulation, just a family group chat where they discussed Victoria's new house purchase made possible by my father's generous down payment gift. That night, I realized that even if I saved lives, revolutionized industries, or changed the world in their eyes, I would remain secondary. No achievement would ever be enough, because the problem had never been about my success. It was about their inability to see me at all. When a Fortune 500 corporation offered to acquire the company for $120 million, I thought the email was a prank. The number seemed surreal, disconnected from the sleepless nights and ramen dinners that had defined my 20s. It took me a full week to believe it was real, and another month of negotiations to finalize the deal. On the day it closed, I walked out of the office watching the late afternoon sunlight cut through the skyscrapers and realized I had just closed the chapter on years of hunger and struggle. The money hit my account on a Tuesday morning. I sat at my kitchen counter, staring at my laptop screen at the number with all those zeros. After taxes and splitting shares with early employees and investors, I had walked away with $68 million. The sum was so vast it lost meaning. It was just digits on a screen, impossible to connect to any tangible reality. I no longer had to worry about what dinner would be tomorrow, or how I would pay rent. I finally had freedom in my hands, not just financial freedom, but the freedom to build whatever life I wanted. Most newly minted tech millionaires immediately splurge on mansions in Palo Alto, or Marin buy exotic cars, or embark on luxury world tours. I did none of that. Instead, I sat quietly in my same apartment for 3 weeks, barely telling anyone about the acquisition, trying to decide what freedom actually meant to me. The answer came when I realized what I had never truly had in my entire life: a home that belonged entirely to me. A place where no one could shut me out. No one could reduce me to a shadow. Not a sterile Silicon Valley mansion, but somewhere with character. Somewhere that could heal the part of me that still felt like the forgotten child at the Christmas tree. I began researching locations somewhere far from the tech bubble, somewhere with natural beauty, but not overrun with wealthy vacationers. I wanted mountains. Their vastness made me feel small in a way that was comforting rather than diminishing. In mountains, everyone is small against nature's backdrop. In mountains, I could finally breathe. That's how I found myself in Aspen, Colorado, on a clear autumn day, the aspens turning golden on the mountainsides. The moment I stepped into that snow-covered valley with the Rocky Mountains towering around me, I knew this was where I would build a place of my own. I told the real estate agent I wasn't interested in existing properties. I wanted land, preferably with water access somewhere private, but not completely isolated. She showed me 7 properties over 3 days each, beautiful in its own way, but none that felt right. Then, as we were driving back to town on the third evening, she mentioned a property not yet officially on the market. The Hendersons are relocating to Europe next month. 42 acres backs up to National Forest, has a small natural lake. They built a caretaker's cabin but never got around to the main house. They're asking $5 million, but they're motivated sellers. We drove out to see it the next morning. The moment I stepped from the car, I felt a sense of belonging I'd never experienced before. The mountains rose majestically behind pristine land dusted with early snow. The small lake reflected the clouds above, and pine trees swayed gently in the wind. I knew instantly this would be my home. The contract was signed within a week, the process expedited by my ability to pay in cash. $5 million, the number that would have terrified me just months earlier, now felt like a worthwhile investment in my future, in my healing. From the moment I signed the papers, I felt lighter, as if I had finally shaken off the invisible chains that had bound me and my parents' indifferent gaze. This land was mine alone. No one had given it to me. No one could take credit for it. It represented everything I had built from nothing. I interviewed 5 architectural firms, eventually selecting a local team who specialized in sustainable mountain homes and understood my vision immediately. I didn't want a typical Aspen mansion all glass and steel and showiness. I wanted something that felt organic to the landscape, built from materials that would age beautifully, designed to last for generations. The lead architect, Elena, spent 3 days just walking the property, with me observing how the sun moved across the land where the wind came from, which views were most striking. She sketched as we walked, her pencil capturing the essence of what I described: a place that felt both sheltering and open to nature, intimate, yet capable of hosting many people. "You keep talking about the dining table," she noted on our third day. "It seems central to your vision." I hadn't realized how often I'd mentioned it, but she was right. In my mind, the heart of this home was a massive dining table where everyone would have equal footing, equal visibility, equal voice. No kids' table, no hierarchy, just a circle of faces illuminated by the same light. "Tables have power," I told her. "Where you sit defines who you are." Elena nodded slowly, understanding flowing between us. "Then we'll design the entire house around that table." The plans took shape over the next month. The lodge would rise from the ground in cedarwood, its red timber carrying a soft fragrance whenever the sunlight touched it. The front doors would open into a grand hall with soaring ceilings, a granite fireplace big enough for a person to step inside, and a chandelier crafted from rough-hewn pine. The main living room would be walled entirely with glass, stretching from floor to ceiling, framing an unbroken view of the snow-capped mountains. Each morning when the sun rose, the light would spill in, scattering across the space like thousands of diamonds. Behind the lodge, we expanded the natural lake and stocked it with salmon and sturgeon, so in summer I could fish beneath the warm sun, and in winter, it would freeze into a perfect mirror reflecting the violet sky. Inside, I designed 10 bedrooms each with its own balcony and private fireplace. The kitchen would be lined with black granite, the island carved from a single slab of walnut, and along the wall would hang cast iron pans gifted by a local chef I had hired as a consultant. But the centerpiece, the heart of the home, would be the dining room. A circular space with windows on all sides, dominated by a massive table crafted from a single ancient oak tree that had fallen naturally in a forest 300 miles away. The table would seat 20 comfortably with no head, no foot, just a perfect circle where every seat held equal importance. Construction began in spring, and I visited every 2 weeks to check progress. I was involved in every detail from the very first sketch to the final finish. This wasn't a project to flaunt wealth. It was my creation, my offering to the little Morgan, who had once been forgotten beneath the Christmas tree. I kept the entire project a secret. Not a word to my family, not a single photo on social media. When close friends asked, I only smiled and said, "I'm busy with a personal project." Because I knew if my parents or Victoria found out, they would twist it into another story. She just got lucky. She must have had help. Or worse, they would drape the credit over Victoria as they had so many times before. I didn't want this taken from me. I wanted it to be mine completely, so that when the time came, I could place it on the table like a trump card that flipped the entire game. Whenever I returned to Aspen to check on the progress, I often stayed for several days, sleeping on a makeshift pine bed in the caretaker's cabin. At night, I would step out onto the porch, wrap a thick blanket around my shoulders, and gaze at the mountains washed in silver moonlight, listening to the wind howl down the slopes. That feeling brought back memories of childhood nights, when I stood outside the old porch looking in at the family gathered together without me. But now it was different. I was no longer the outsider. I was building a home of my own, a world where I chose who was worthy to sit by the fire and who would remain forever outside the door. During one of these visits in late autumn, as the project neared completion, I found myself sitting with Elena on the newly finished main deck, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Construction workers had left for the day, and the site was quiet, except for the gentle rustle of aspens in the evening breeze. "You know," Elena said quietly, "in all my years of designing homes, I've never seen someone so intentional about creating space for others. Most clients focus on master suites and private areas. You've poured the most attention into communal spaces." I considered her observation, watching the light fade from the peaks. When you've spent your life trying to find your place at someone else's table, you become very deliberate about how you build your own. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, stars appearing one by one in the deep blue sky. For the first time in my life, I felt a profound sense of peace, not the restless ambition that had driven me through my 20s, but something quieter and more enduring. I was creating not just a structure of wood and stone, but a physical manifestation of the home I'd never had. When the construction was finally complete in early December, I walked slowly through the house alone, running my hand across every tabletop, every door frame. In my mind, one thought echoed over and over: this is my home, not the home of the younger daughter of the Reynolds family, not a place where Victoria was always the standard by which I was measured. This was my domain, and no one could deny it. I knew that one day I would have to bring it into the light, and when that day came, it would be my answer. No shouting, no arguments, just a silent, undeniable truth. Morgan was no longer a shadow. That moment came sooner than I expected on a snowy evening in mid-December. When my mother's text message appeared on my phone screen, This year, just Victoria's family, keeping it small. 8 words that might once have crushed me now felt almost comical in their predictability. I sat in my Denver apartment where I still kept a small place for business trips and felt something shift inside me. Not pain, not even anger, but a calm certainty that the time had come to reveal what I had built. But first, I needed to know, was it only me who had been excluded? Or had my parents truly wanted a small Christmas? I scrolled through my contacts until I found Sophia, my cousin, and Aunt Patricia's daughter. Sophia had always been honest with me, sometimes brutally so, and I knew she would tell me the truth. Morgan. Sophia answered, surprise evident in her voice. You're calling this late. Is everything okay? I asked her directly if she had received an invitation to Christmas at my parents' home. The pause before her dry, humorless laugh told me everything. Sarah messaged my mom saying, this year it's immediate family only, meaning just Victoria and her family. Sophia confirmed. No one was invited, not even Grandma Eleanor. She called me today furious. She said, this hasn't happened in 30 years. As we spoke further, a pattern emerged that I had suspected, but never fully confronted. Year after year, my parents had been gradually centering the holidays more exclusively around Victoria. Last year, when she had her first child, Christmas became a celebration of her little angel, with everyone else serving merely as an audience. The year before, when she landed her director position, the family gathering became a showcase for her career achievements. This year, they had simply taken it to its logical conclusion, cutting out everyone who wasn't necessary for Victoria's spotlight to shine, including me, including everyone. When I hung up the phone, I sat alone in my darkened apartment, snow falling thick outside the window. A strange clarity washed over me. This was no longer just about me and my childhood wounds. This was about a pattern that affected our entire family, a system my parents had created, where only one person truly mattered. I had built something different. I had created a home where the table was circular, where every seat held equal importance, and suddenly I knew exactly what I needed to do. I texted Sophia, if you and your family want come to my ranch in Aspen for Christmas, I'll take care of everything. Her response came almost instantly. You have a ranch. Let me tell Mom, but if you're serious, we'll come. 20 minutes later, she called back, excitement bubbling in her voice. We're in, and I think some of the other cousins will want to come too. What began as impulse quickly transformed into purpose. I started reaching out to other family members, people who, like me, had been gradually pushed to the margins of family gatherings. My cousin Nathan in Chicago, who had stopped attending family Christmases years ago, laughed when I explained my plan. A Christmas that doesn't revolve around Victoria and your parents count me in. Aunt Patricia grew emotional when I called, her voice softening. Morgan, do you know how long it's been since someone actually took the initiative to gather the family thank you? But it was my call with Grandma Eleanor that affected me most deeply. She had always been kind to me, but distance and my parents' gatekeeping had limited our relationship. When I told her about my home in Aspen and invited her for Christmas, she went quiet for a moment. Just tell me when to pack. She finally said, her voice steady but warm. In those 5 words, I heard decades of similar experiences, of being overlooked, of watching the family she had built fragment under the weight of favoritism. Within 24 hours, my invitation list had grown to 15 people, cousins, aunts, uncles, and friends of the family, who had gradually been excluded from the inner circle. With each confirmation, I felt a growing sense of purpose and excitement. For the first time, I was creating the kind of Christmas I had always wanted, one where everyone mattered. As the guest list grew, I realized I couldn't approach this casually. This wasn't just a gathering. It was an opportunity to heal wounds that had festered for years. It needed to be perfect, not in the showy, superficial way my parents preferred, but in the thoughtful attention to each person's comfort and joy. I began planning as meticulously as I had once planned supply chain optimizations. I called Margaret, a local chef in Aspen, known for her traditional cooking, to handle the food. I want a true Christmas feast, I told her. Roasted turkey with fresh herbs, creamy mashed potatoes, tangy cranberry sauce, golden crusted apple pie, and thick frothy eggnog served in warm ceramic mugs. When Margaret arrived at the lodge to discuss details, she stood in the kitchen, her weathered hands tracing the edge of the Walnut Island, tears welling in her eyes. "I've never seen a kitchen that makes me want to light the stove immediately like this," she said, "and I knew I had found the right person to create our Christmas meal." I decorated the lodge myself, placing a 12-foot tree in the center of the grand hall, its branches so full we had to use a ladder to hang all the ornaments. I chose golden glass baubles intertwined with bright red ribbons, and at the very top a silver star that gleamed like ice under the lights. Out on the balcony, I strung hundreds of small golden bulbs so that when night fell, the entire lodge glowed like a giant gift box nestled in the snowy forest. I hired local artisans to craft fresh wreaths for the doorframes woven from pine branches, red berries, and strips of rustic linen. Each time you stepped inside, the scent of resin mingled with cinnamon and dried orange, filling the space with the unmistakable spirit of Christmas. I didn't want anyone to feel like a temporary guest, so I prepared each bedroom as if it were their own home. On Aunt Patricia's nightstand, I placed a stack of historical novels I knew she loved, along with a small card that read, "Auntie, I remember you once said reading is like living another life." For Sophia's two children, I set out a Snowy City Lego set wrapped in silver blue paper, with their names written on the tags. I could already picture the way they would squeal as they tore the paper apart, their eyes sparkling like fireworks. And for Grandma Eleanor, I left a box of imported herbal tea, the kind she used to love but rarely allowed herself to buy because it was too expensive. Beside it, I placed a hand-knitted ash gray wool scarf from a small shop in Aspen, with a note that said, "So you can sit by the fire without worrying about the cold." I was even more careful with the smallest details. On the massive oak dining table in the great hall, I spread a hand-embroidered white cloth and placed cinnamon and vanilla-scented candles along the center. I arranged for young musicians from town to play violin and guitar in the evening, so the house would be filled with the warmth of Christmas melodies. Outside on the terrace, I had a fire pit prepared, stacking dry logs high, so anyone could sit by the flames, sip mulled wine, and watch the snowfall. In the small library, I set up a puzzle table for both kids and adults to gather around and build together, instead of staring at their phones. I wanted everyone who came here to feel only one thing: that they were valued, remembered, and truly seen. I didn't forget the entertainment room either. Plush velvet sofas in deep green, a wide projection screen, and a projector ready to play classic Christmas films like It's a Wonderful Life and Home Alone. I pictured the children huddled together under thick blankets, giggling uncontrollably whenever the main characters stumbled into mischief. I had bowls of buttered popcorn and marshmallows waiting so that laughter would echo through the entire lodge. As I looked around, I realized every detail carried a piece of my heart. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to my parents or to Victoria. I was doing it because I knew too well the sting of being forgotten, of being dismissed. I didn't want anyone in my family to carry wounds like mine. I wanted every person who walked into this place to feel that this time, they truly belonged at the table. And most importantly, I wanted to sit down myself to look around and see faces glowing in the firelight, knowing I had created something different. Not a shadow of the family gatherings I had endured, but something new and real and warm. The night before everyone arrived, I stood alone in the great hall. The towering tree shimmered with lights, golden reflections dancing across the cedar walls, and the fireplace burned bright. I sank into the armchair by the window, staring out at the snow falling thick over the lake. My heart beat fast, a blend of nerves and peace. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the outsider anymore. I was the one writing the script, and in the morning when the doors opened, I would witness my Christmas begin. A Christmas where no one would ever feel left out again. By early morning, snow had blanketed the steps and railings, the flakes dusting the polished cedar like grains of salt. In the kitchen, Margaret and her two assistants were already bustling in aprons, filling the air with the rich scent of butter, cinnamon, and thyme. Tom, the property manager I'd hired for the occasion, made his final rounds with a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, checking the heating system, reminding staff to stack extra baskets of wood near the fireplaces, and refill the bin on the porch. I hung 2 more red ribbons at the top of the 12-foot tree in the Great Hall, straightened the silver star, then stepped back to take it all in. Every detail was in its place. Fresh wreaths heavy with berries draped over the door frames, strings of golden lights waiting to flicker on at dusk. The long dining table draped with embroidered linen lined with candles, crystal glasses, and folded napkins. The library stacked with a new puzzle for the children. The projection room preloaded with Christmas films. And on the side table by the fireplace, a neat stack of handwritten cards thanking each person simply for showing up. The first SUV rumbled up the slope into the driveway, its tires crunching over the fine layer of snow. The door swung open, and Sophia stepped out, tugging at her coat collar, her eyes wide with disbelief against the pale blur of white. She spun toward me, the car door still ajar, and blurted out in a voice that cracked like a long-suppressed cheer. You built an entire world and never told me." I laughed, opening my arms to pull her into a hug, feeling the soft patter of melting snowflakes on her hat. In her words, I heard not only amazement, but also a quiet relief I knew all too well. Her 2 children pressed their faces against the doorway, their eyes glowing as they caught sight of the towering tree. Within seconds, they bolted into the great hall, only to freeze in awe at the toy train circling around the base of the tree. I led the family down the hall, opening each door marked with their names. When Sophia saw the Snowy City Lego set waiting on the nightstand with her children's names carefully written on it, she turned to me, lips trembling without a word. I knew she understood. Here, everyone was remembered. One by one, more cars climbed the hill, headlights trailing like a slow procession of amber lanterns through the winter dusk. Nathan arrived from Chicago carrying his guitar in a canvas case, his new girlfriend stepping in shyly before relaxing instantly as the scent of warm apple pie filled the lodge. Uncle Thomas embraced me with the kind of hug that needed no words, the hug of a man who didn't speak much all year, but would always haul a heavy stack of firewood without hesitation. Aunt Patricia, catching the cedar's fragrance, whispered that it smelled like the home of her childhood, then quickly wiped her eyes when she spotted the bundle of historical novels tied neatly with twine on her table, a gift that seemed to have waited just for her. I moved through the familiar faces, handing out scarves, taking coats, laughing, guiding each person to their room. The house filled with the sounds of life, Margaret's voice calling out from the kitchen as her spoon clinked against the pot. Time to test the cranberry sauce. And somewhere down the hall, Tom's quiet reminder, watch the steps, the snow's settling again. Before dinner, the children had already claimed the library, tearing open the snowy forest puzzle and scattering pieces across the table. Out on the porch, Nathan unzipped his guitar case, tuning the strings, until the first warm notes spilled out glowing like fire in the cold air. Inside, Sophia and I replaced the candles in the bronze holders and checked each place card on the table. There was no kids' table. I had made a point of arranging only one long table wide enough for everyone to sit side by side. No one shoved to the edges. No one forced to turn a chair just to face someone's back. I placed Grandma Eleanor near me in the middle so she wouldn't catch a draft. Set Aunt Patricia beside Sophia so they could talk easily, and left 2 wide spaces across from the fireplace for anyone carrying little ones. The young musicians from town arrived quietly, setting their instrument cases in the corner, and asked permission to try a soft carol. The violin's notes floated like a ribbon through the air, and even the candle flames seemed to sway more gently. When the moment came, Margaret carried in the turkey, golden skin glistening, brushed with melted herb butter pooling at the edges. The aroma rolled across the room in a warm wave, and everyone instinctively leaned forward to breathe it in. I laid the carving knife beside it, then handed it to Uncle Thomas, because the way his hand steadied on the handle always made the whole table feel at ease. Mashed potatoes were passed from hand to hand. Cranberry sauce gleamed dark red like wine. Roasted Brussels sprouts hissed faintly as the platter was set down, and garlic bread steamed like an open invitation to take more. I poured wine for each person, touching glasses lightly at every seat. No speeches, no grand announcements, only 4 words, "Thank you for coming," and the table began to live on its own stories, weaving back and forth bursts of laughter, catching and spreading like fire hands reaching across to rest on someone else's arm as old memories resurfaced. What I loved most was the way the children sat among the adults, not banished to some noisy little island of their own. Sophia's son asked Aunt Patricia if Christmas used to feel like this when she was young, and she told him about the papier-mâché tree the whole family once built together. Nathan's girlfriend shared the story of her first holiday in the north, when the snow piled so high it froze against the windows. Uncle Thomas told of a hunting trip that failed and turned instead into a night of ghost stories by the campfire. Everything wove together like threads in a thick tapestry, and I realized I was standing in the middle of it, no longer on the outside, looking through the glass. I raised my glass again when Margaret brought out the apple pie, its crust sparkling with brown sugar, and poured more eggnog into the ceramic mugs. The warmth seeped through my hands at my neck, softening everyone's eyes to a slower rhythm. It was then that Grandma Eleanor placed her hand over mine. Her touch was light but steady, the kind of steadiness that comes from a woman who had seen enough winters to know when words are needed and when silence speaks louder. She leaned toward me, her tea-colored eyes fixed on mine, her voice raspy with emotion, yet clear as a bell. "You've given us a real Christmas. For the first time in years, we feel like we belong." I couldn't answer right away. Something inside me cracked open, melting like ice, warm and stinging all at once. All I could do was squeeze her hand, nod, and feel that, unlike every year before, my "thank you" wasn't just politeness. It was the only thing keeping me from breaking into tears. After dessert, Nathan slipped his guitar strap over his shoulder and strummed the first chords of Silent Night. The whole table hummed along, voices not polished or perfect, but so sincere that even the fire seemed to quiet itself to listen. When the song ended, the children clapped wildly before dashing to the window, pressing their noses to the glass, pointing out which snowflake looked prettier. Sophia tugged me into the center, gathering everyone for a photo in front of the tree. Tom held the camera steady, framing it so the chandelier and fireplace glowed behind us. And in that picture, I saw something I had never seen before. My own face, not tense, not defensive, not forcing a smile to fit into someone else's portrait, but smiling naturally, like someone finally at home. Someone sent the photo to the family group chat, along with snapshots of the kids hugging their Lego sets, Grandma Eleanor sipping her herbal tea, and Uncle Thomas raising a glass on the porch. I didn't think much of the pictures beyond the fact that they were beautiful enough to print and pin on the library wall the next day. Night fell quickly in Aspen. I slid open the back door, the cold wind stinging my cheeks, as if to remind me I was standing on a real hillside, not a comforting screensaver. Tom had already lit the bonfire by the lake. Sparks rose and died in the dark, popping like a drummer marking the silence. A few people wrapped themselves in wool blankets, sipping mulled wine, sharing how many holidays they had skipped over the years just to avoid squeezing into a table crowded with favoritism. Sophia sat down beside me, leaned her shoulder into mine, and whispered so softly I had to watch her lips to catch it. "I don't know what else to say except thank you, because for the first time I saw my kids sitting in the right place." I turned to her, pressed my forehead lightly against her temple, and thought this might be the closest thing to an apology fate had ever given us. After everyone drifted back inside, I returned to the great hall. Only the candles remained, their flames sinking low in glass holders, the scent of cinnamon and vanilla still rich in the air. Margaret was gathering silver trays, humming a faint hymn, while Tom set down a fresh basket of wood beside the fireplace. I told them both to rest early, that tomorrow all we'd need to do was reheat the sauce. Margaret smiled and said she had already asked the young musicians to come a bit earlier to rehearse another song, because this house sings better than any concert hall. I lingered a moment longer, running my fingers along the back of a chair, the edge of the table, then gazing out through the tall windows. Beyond the glass, the hillside was ink black, but studded with the tiny golden lights strung along the balcony. In the soft crackle of wood, I understood why this night was unlike every Christmas before. It wasn't because the turkey tasted better, or because the house was larger. It was because for the first time I didn't have to search for my place. My place was here in the home I had built among the people who had chosen to show up at a table where every seat carried the same worth. And as I closed the hearth door to bank the fire, I felt my heartbeat slow into a rhythm of someone who had finally returned home after a very long journey. The next morning, pale light spilled through the tall glass panels, laying a silver sheen across the thick carpet of the living room. I woke in silence, a silence so peaceful, it felt like a gift, but it lasted only a few minutes. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, vibrating over and over the screen, flashing without pause. 6 missed calls from my mother, 4 from my father, followed by a flood of messages. Then a new notification lit up from Victoria. I hadn't opened it yet, but the preview line alone was enough to make my chest sink. "Really cheap move, Morgan. Enjoy your little show." I drew a deep breath, picked up the phone, and walked down to the Great Hall. Grandma Eleanor was already there, sitting by the fireplace with a cup of herbal tea in her hand, her gaze distant yet peaceful. When she saw me, she smiled. "You're awake. Last night it was beautiful, Morgan. The whole family needed that." Her smile made me want to ignore every call flashing on my screen. But then the phone rang again, this time from my mother. I couldn't avoid it forever. I decided to answer and, more importantly, to let Grandma Eleanor hear too. I pressed the speaker button and set the phone on the wooden table, the fire crackling softly as though it too was listening to what was about to unfold. My mother's voice burst through sharp and louder than usual. "Morgan, do you realize what you've just done? The entire town is talking about your Christmas gathering. Pastor even mentioned it during service this morning. Do you know how we're being perceived right now?" I kept my tone even, neither high nor low. "You messaged me that this year it would be just Victoria and her family. I simply followed what you said, keeping it small. I hosted my own without troubling anyone. End of story." There was a pause, and then my mother rushed in, her words tumbling over themselves, as if trying to drag me into an endless loop of excuses. "That's not what I meant. What I meant was, you're always so busy with work, with projects. I thought you wouldn't want the hassle." And Victoria, well, I cut her off, calm but firm. "She's always the center, isn't she, Mom?" The air in the room froze. Grandma Eleanor set her cup gently on the table, her eyes fixed squarely on the phone. I hadn't spoken again before she stepped in, her voice low and steady, each word slicing through the silence like a blade. "Sarah Michael, that's enough. You've spent a lifetime neglecting this child. Since she was a little girl in the garage, you acted as if she were invisible. Last night, for the first time in years, I saw her do what the family should have done for her long ago, give us a real Christmas, damn it." There was a brief silence on the other end before my father spoke, his voice trying for calm but faltering with unease. "Mother, you're exaggerating. We were only trying to keep things simple. Victoria, she—" Grandma Eleanor cut in before he could shift the blame. "Simple. What does that mean, to see only one child and forget the other? To parade Victoria before the world, while Morgan sits quietly at the kids' table. Last night I sat in the middle of that table and saw all the people you've cast aside for years. We laughed, we sang, we ate together like a family. And not once did anyone mention Victoria. For the first time, we weren't orbiting around the so-called perfection you built up." A long, heavy sigh dragged across the line. Then my mother's voice, softer now, slipped through. "Mother, I never meant to hurt anyone. We just wanted to—" Grandma Eleanor's voice struck back firm and sharper than the crack of wood in the fire. "No, Sarah. This is no longer about what you meant or didn't mean. This is about who is seen and who is forgotten. And Morgan has endured far too much." I sat still, my hand gripping the armrest, my heart pounding, but not from fear. For the first time in my life, someone was speaking the words I had swallowed for years, the words I had once silenced with bitten lips while others spoke over me. I heard my father's labored breath, then his short retort. "That's not fair," Grandma Eleanor fired back immediately. "Unfair is exactly how you've treated her all these years. Unfair is when she brought home achievements and you brushed them aside while Victoria only had to smile to be praised. Unfair is when the family gathered and Morgan was left on the fringe. If fairness existed, she wouldn't have had to build a new table just so the rest of us could finally have a place to sit." There were no more defenses. The line went silent. The only sound left was the fire crackling in the hearth. I exhaled a long breath, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to justify myself. I simply said, I think that's enough. We'll talk later if we need to. I pressed the button to end the call and placed the phone face down on the table. In that moment, I felt lighter, as if a stone that had weighed on my chest for years had finally been lifted. I leaned back in the chair, and Grandma Eleanor set her hand on my shoulder. She didn't say anything more, only gave a gentle squeeze. In her eyes, I saw pride mixed with sorrow. Sorrow for having to watch her own daughter, my mother, fail at the very role of being a mother. But for me, that moment no longer felt like a wound. It was closure. A door finally shut behind me. I didn't feel weak, nor did I feel the urge to argue anymore. I only felt release. Because from that moment forward, I knew I had my own table, my own home, and a true family who chose to show up, people who chose me, not just Victoria. My phone didn't stay silent for long after that call. But this time the vibrations weren't sharp like accusations. They came gently, warmly, like a soft knock, reminding me that someone outside still wanted to come in. The first message was from Sophia. Sis, last night was wonderful. I've never seen the kids laugh so much. Next year at the ranch again, I'll bring gingerbread cookies. Reading it, my chest glowed as if a fire had sparked inside, and I found myself touching the edge of the chair just to ground myself in the truth that it had all really happened. Right after, Nathan sent a flood of photos. The kids gathered around the tree, Aunt Patricia cradling her stack of new books, Uncle Thomas raising a glass of wine on the porch, and one picture of me smiling a rare smile, unforced. Beneath it, he wrote, "This is family. You gave us something we all thought was impossible. Don't let this be the first and the last." I stared at the screen, remembering all the years I had waited quietly to be named in the family story, and no one ever did. But today, a cousin had written it plainly for me to see. This time I wasn't the shadow anymore. The family group chat, which for years had been nothing more than a place to share a few photos of the kids or toss around half-hearted birthday wishes, suddenly came alive. Someone sent a picture of a plate of turkey with the caption, "Better than any Christmas I've ever had." Another shared a video of the group singing "Silent Night," Nathan's guitar weaving through Uncle Thomas's gravelly voice, and everyone who replayed it dropped heart emojis in response. Aunt Patricia wrote, "We need to make this a tradition. Morgan, you lead us every year at the ranch." And minutes later, Grandma Eleanor chimed in, her typing slow but steady. "That place carries the warmth of family. We will all return." I sat in the living room, phone in hand, surrounded by the fading glow of embers in the fireplace. Never had I felt so clearly seen. Not because the ranch was grand, not because the food was elaborate, but because everyone genuinely acknowledged me as the one who had created the space for all of us. The focus no longer revolved around Victoria. No one was asking what the golden daughter had done, worn, or said. The story had shifted like a river carving a new course. Now the conversation was about next year, about us, with the name Morgan right at the center. Sophia sent another message. "Kayla and I are thinking of renting a bigger car next year to bring the in-laws. They'll love the ranch." Nathan added, "I'll bring a small band from Chicago. We'll play live." Another cousin chimed in, "I'll handle the desserts. Morgan doesn't need to do everything." The messages poured in, but this time they didn't feel suffocating. I smiled to myself, scrolling line after line, drinking them in like water after years of thirst. That evening, as I was stirring a cup of hot cocoa, Grandma Eleanor came to sit beside me. She stayed silent for a while, her eyes fixed on the fire, as if reading memories in the glowing embers. Then she spoke softly. "Do you see it, Morgan? You've changed everything. Before, family gatherings always revolved around your parents and Victoria. Everyone else only showed up out of obligation. But this time, everyone felt they had a place. That is what family truly means." I nodded, my eyes burning. For years, I had asked myself whether I had the strength to change my role, or whether I was destined to remain on the outside forever. Now, the answer was clear. I could create a new table, one where everyone truly belonged. In the days that followed, the family group chat stayed alive with energy. Someone posted photos of snow on the drive home. Another shared that the kids hadn't stopped singing the carols from that night. One cousin even joked, "If Victoria finds out, she'll lose her mind." Strangely enough, no one mentioned my parents. No one asked why they hadn't been there. They had removed themselves from the story, and everyone else no longer felt the need to bring them up. That was the real shift. The focus was no longer on who hadn't come, but on the ones who had shown up. I felt myself grow lighter as I realized that sometimes family isn't the people who boast about one child while ignoring the other. True family is made of those who choose to come, choose to sit down, choose to hold your hand and say, "We needed this." In the quiet evenings, I wrote down everything that had happened to carve it deeper into memory. The glow of faces around the table, the laughter that needed no mask, the imperfect but heartfelt music. It all played in my mind like a film I would carry with me for the rest of my life. On the final night before everyone left, I stood on the porch watching the snow fall. Sophia came up beside me and whispered, "Do you realize it? This year we didn't follow them. We followed you." I turned to her, her eyes shining with the reflection of the golden balcony lights. I didn't answer right away. I just wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Inside me, a truth rang clear. I had stopped chasing a seat at someone else's table. I had built my own, and everyone had chosen to sit with me. A week after the whole extended family had left the ranch, the silence of the Aspen Mountains returned. Snow kept falling, covering the trails and steps in a steady white blanket. But inside the lodge, it was only me and a few staff tidying up. That quiet, instead of making me feel lonely, felt like the mountains themselves exhaling, giving me space to sit and truly think about what came next. Even though I had found a kind of release, one question lingered in my mind. Would my parents and Victoria ever truly understand? Or was I destined to let this distance remain permanent? After many nights of turning it over, I sent a message so brief and simple I almost surprised myself. "If you want, you and Victoria can come to the ranch for dinner. Just immediate family, no one else." I had no expectations. I only wanted to see if, for the first time given the chance to sit at my table, they might actually hear, really hear the things I had never said aloud. They arrived on a late winter afternoon when the sky was cast in lead and gray, and the wind whipped hard across the ridges. I stood on the front porch wrapped in a thick sweater, watching their familiar SUV crawl up the hill. My father stepped out first, his face stern but his eyes flickering with uncertainty. My mother followed, pulling her scarf tight, avoiding direct eye contact. Victoria got out last, her leather boots sinking deep into the snow lips pressed tightly together. I invited them in, took their coats, and led them to the dining room I had prepared. Dinner was far simpler than the week before. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, red wine, and fresh bread still warm from the oven. No music, no twinkling lights, only the soft glow of candles on the wooden table. We sat down, the silence stretching thin across the table. My father cleared his throat. "The house, it's beautiful." My mother added softly, "Different from what I imagined." Victoria said nothing, her eyes wandering around the room, occasionally flicking toward me before dropping back down. I poured the wine, slid their glasses across, then rested my hand on the table and drew a long breath. "I didn't invite you here tonight to show off and not to accuse. I just want to say the things I was never allowed to say." No one objected. The air was thick, but I knew I had to continue. I spoke of the Christmases when I was forgotten, the times my achievements were left hanging in the middle of family conversations, the feeling of being made to sit at the kids' table even when I already knew who I wanted to become. I told them about the years at Stanford, eating instant noodles, sleeping on sofas, while still receiving messages from home praising only Victoria, making her parents so proud. I recalled the moment my company was sold for $120 million, and how my father only gave a faint smile and said, "Technology is too complicated. Let's talk about Victoria instead." Each word I spoke felt like removing another stone that had weighed on my chest for years. My father bowed his head, fingers rolling the rim of his glass. My mother looked at me, her eyes glistening, though no tears fell. Victoria stayed silent, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. When I finally stopped, the dining room fell into stillness. Then my father murmured, Maybe I didn't see it all. My mother followed her voice small but genuine. I never meant to, Morgan. But maybe I made you think I wasn't proud. The truth is, I just didn't say it. I didn't reply, didn't forgive outright, but for the first time I heard honesty, however late it had come. Victoria still didn't speak. She only held my gaze for a long moment, her eyes no longer mocking but carrying an emptiness I couldn't name. After dinner, Victoria slipped out onto the balcony. I followed her, closing the door behind us. The cold air bit at our faces as we stood side by side looking out at the moonlit mountains. "I always envied you," she said suddenly, her voice barely audible over the wind. I turned to her, surprised. "Envied me for what? Your freedom? Your ability to do whatever you wanted without worrying about disappointing them?" I almost laughed. They never expected enough of me to be disappointed. I know, but I had to be perfect. I don't know who I am if I'm not their golden child. As we stood there in the cold, Victoria told me about the weight she carried, how our parents had chosen her schools, her friends, even her career path, how every decision was made to reflect well on them, to fulfill their vision of success, how she sometimes looked at my life and wondered what it would be like to build something entirely her own. "Do you even like marketing?" I asked. She shrugged a small, defeated gesture. "I don't know. I've never done anything else." In that moment, I saw her clearly for the first time, not as the enemy, not as the favorite, but as another casualty of our parents' narrow vision. We were both damaged, just in different ways. She was trapped by expectations. I was wounded by their absence. When dinner ended, they prepared to leave. My father shook my hand firmer than usual. My mother embraced me briefly, yet long enough for me to feel that something had shifted. Victoria was the last to step out, pausing at the door. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but only gave a slight nod before turning away. I didn't stop her. I didn't expect a perfect apology. It was enough that for once they had listened. On New Year's Eve, I sat alone on the balcony, a wool blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Snow fell thick and steady, catching the dim silver of the moon, and the whole valley lay in a sacred kind of silence. I held a glass of wine, breathed in the biting cold that filled my lungs, and closed my eyes. In my mind, the words rose like a vow: I don't need to wait for anyone to give me a seat. I have built my own table and opened the doors for those who truly know how to cherish it. If you're listening to this story, I want you to remember one thing. You don't need anyone's approval to have worth. Being forgotten or compared does not mean you are small. You can build your own table, one where only those who truly value you will have a seat. I was once pushed to the sidelines, once convinced I was invisible. But out of that pain, I learned how to rise, to choose myself, and to build a life on my own terms. And you can do the same. See your wounds not as an ending, but as the fuel that drives you to create a new kind of family, one made of friendship, kindness, and resilience. One day you'll realize the table you've built is more beautiful than anything you ever dreamed.